I watched the text notification light up my phone screen at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning in late September, 3 weeks and 4 days before my wedding. The break room fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that steady electrical buzz that becomes white noise until everything else goes quiet. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth, a cherry tomato speared on the tines, still glistening with vinaigrette. The coffee in my paper cup had gone lukewarm, a ring of tan foam clinging to the rim. Madison's message sat there on the screen, 9 words that made my pulse slow and then quicken. Mom and I talked to the vineyard. They're giving us your October date because I'm showing and can't wait until next year. You're young, you can reschedule. I read it twice, then a third time. My breathing stayed even, but something deep in my chest shifted, not loudly, but permanently. I set the fork down. The plate made a small ceramic click against the laminate table. Through the break room window, I could see the parking lot, heat shimmering off the asphalt even though it was nearly October. A minivan pulled into a spot marked "Expecting Mothers." The hydraulic hum of the dental chair in the next room filtered through the wall. This wasn't the first time Madison had taken something that was mine. But this time, she'd made a mistake. This time, there was paperwork. I grew up in a split-level house on the eastern edge of a small northwestern city, where rain started in October and didn't really stop until May. The house had beige siding and a carport that always smelled faintly of motor oil and damp concrete. Madison was born when I was 4, and I remember the way our mother's voice changed when she cried, softer, urgent, accommodating. I learned early that my silence bought Madison's peace. She got the bigger bedroom when we were 12 and 8. She got the car when she turned 18, a used Honda with only 30,000 miles, paid in full by our parents. I got a job bussing tables and saved for a bike. Our father worked in mid-level insurance sales, the kind of job that required ties and optimism and produced just enough income to cover the mortgage, groceries, and Madison's endless requests. Our mother worked part-time at a dental office, ironic, considering where I'd end up, and spent her evenings managing the household budget with a yellow legal pad and a calculator that clicked with every key press. But somehow, when Madison needed something, the budget stretched. Yoga teacher training in Bali, funded. A security deposit for an apartment she changed her mind about, covered. The guest house behind their newly upgraded home, the one they'd bought when I was 25, hers, rent-free, utilities included, decorated with furniture our mother picked out on weekend shopping trips I was never invited to. I moved out at 19 with 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen supplies from Goodwill, and a job offer at a dental clinic 15 minutes from the community college where I'd enrolled in the hygiene program. I worked 40 hours a week and carried a full course load. I learned to clean teeth, take x-rays, and recognize the early signs of gum disease. I learned to smile at patients who didn't floss and parents who didn't bring their kids in until the cavities were already deep. I learned that asking my family for help meant being told Madison needed it more. So I stopped asking. By 33, I'd built a life I was genuinely proud of. I worked at a busy practice in a suburban strip mall wedged between a nail salon and a tax prep office. The building was plain, tan brick, black awnings, but the work was steady. I saw 20 patients a day, sometimes 22 if we ran behind. I made $72,000 a year. I had health insurance, a retirement account, and a small emergency fund I'd never had to touch. Tyler, my fiancé, was a firefighter stationed in a neighboring suburb. We'd met 3 years earlier at a community blood drive. He was steady in the way some people are steady, not boring, just reliable. The kind of man who showed up when he said he would, who remembered your coffee order, who didn't make promises he couldn't keep. We'd saved for 2 years to buy a small starter home on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The house was modest, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a backyard barely big enough for a grill, and 2 folding chairs, but it had a blue front door and hardwood floors we'd refinished ourselves over a long weekend in July. The mortgage was manageable. The neighbors were kind. It was ours, and no one had helped us buy it. The wedding had taken another 14 months of planning. We'd visited 7 venues before we found the vineyard an hour south, tucked into rolling hills that turned gold and crimson in October. The property had stone walls covered in ivy, long wooden tables for outdoor seating, and string lights that crisscrossed above a brick patio. The tasting room smelled like oak barrels and ripening grapes. We'd signed the contract 11 months ago, in November of the previous year, and put down a non-refundable deposit of $8,000. We'd sent invitations in July, booked the caterer in August, ordered the flowers in early September. My dress hung in a garment bag in our bedroom closet, ivory lace with a scalloped neckline. And now Madison wanted it. Not a similar venue. Not a different weekend. Mine. Exactly mine. I didn't call my mother right away. I finished my shift, 2 cleanings, 1 set of x-rays, a consultation for a crown. I smiled at patients. I logged notes in the system. I restocked exam room 3 with gloves and bibs. At 4:30, I clocked out, walked to my car, and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the windows cracked. The air smelled like asphalt and cut grass from the apartment complex next door. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then dialed. My mother picked up on the 3rd ring. "Emma, I was going to call you," she said, her voice already edging toward defensive. There was a television on in the background, the low murmur of a talk show. I asked her, as calmly as I could, what Madison's text meant. There was a pause, long enough that I heard her exhale. "Madison's situation is delicate, Emma. She's pregnant. She can't wait until next year. You'll understand when you have kids." My jaw tightened. I felt my back teeth press together. I asked if she knew Tyler, and I had a signed contract with the vineyard. Another pause, shorter this time. "We'll help you find somewhere else. There are other venues. Nice ones, probably even nicer than the one you picked." I heard dishes clinking in the background, ceramic on ceramic, water running. She was unloading the dishwasher. This conversation, to her, was an interruption, not a crisis. "Madison needs this," she continued, her voice taking on a firmer edge. "You're young. You're capable. You'll figure it out. We've already talked to her about budgets and timelines. It makes sense, Emma. You have to see that." The line went quiet for a moment, and I realized she was waiting. Waiting for me to agree. To smooth it over. To be reasonable, the way I'd always been reasonable. I thanked her for her time, my voice flat, and hung up before she could respond. I sat there in the parking lot, engine still off, staring at the faded handicap symbol painted on the asphalt 2 spaces ahead. A woman pushed a stroller past my car, the wheels clicking rhythmically over the pavement cracks. My chest felt tight, but my mind was oddly clear. Part of me had been expecting this. Not this exactly, not my wedding, but something. Madison had borrowed my favorite necklace in high school, a silver chain with a tiny turquoise pendant our grandmother had given me, and claimed she'd lost it at a party. I found it 2 years later in her jewelry box, tangled with costume earrings. She'd told my college boyfriend, during Thanksgiving break my sophomore year, that I was seeing someone else. They'd broken up over text before I even got back to campus. She'd called me crying at 2 in the morning 3 years ago, begging for $3,000 for an emergency, a landlord threatening eviction, she'd said. I'd wired the money the next day. She never mentioned it again. Never paid it back. When I asked, 6 months later, she looked at me blankly and said, "I thought that was a gift." Every time, our parents had mediated with the same script. She didn't mean it. Family forgives. You're being too sensitive. Let it go. And every time I had. Because that's what you did. That's what kept the peace. But sitting there in that parking lot, staring at nothing, I realized peace had only ever gone one direction. I'd been keeping it. Madison had been breaking it. And no one had ever asked her to stop. That evening, I told Tyler. We sat at our small kitchen table, the one we'd found at an estate sale and refinished with sandpaper and 3 coats of polyurethane. The finish was smooth now, the grain of the wood visible under the overhead light. His jaw tightened as I walked him through the text, the phone call, my mother's tone. He didn't interrupt. He let me finish. Then he leaned back in his chair, his hands folded on the table, and asked one question. "What do you want to do?" I looked at the folder on the counter next to the microwave, the one with all our wedding documents. Contracts. Receipts. Itemized quotes. Confirmation emails. Everything organized in clear plastic sleeves, labeled with sticky tabs, because that's how I'd always operated. Thorough. Prepared. Responsible. I'd made copies of everything. I'd highlighted deadlines. I'd saved every email thread. And it hit me then, with a strange, cold clarity that settled into my bones. I had the paperwork. Madison didn't. She had a text message and our mother's permission. I had a legal contract signed by both parties, notarized, and filed. The next morning, I called the vineyard before my first patient. I stood in the staff kitchenette with the door closed, my phone pressed to my ear. A woman named Karen answered. She was the events manager, the one we'd worked with from the beginning. Her voice was warm, professional. I explained, as calmly as I could, that my sister had apparently contacted them about my wedding date. There was a brief pause, then a soft, confused laugh. Oh yes, Madison called yesterday afternoon. She seemed to think we could just transfer your reservation to her. I explained that's not how contracts work. She got quite upset. My pulse slowed. I asked Karen to clarify exactly what she'd told Madison. Karen's tone shifted, taking on a firmer, more precise quality. Your contract is ironclad, Emma. It's a legally binding agreement between you, your fiancé, and our venue. Your deposit is non-refundable, and your event date is exclusively yours. We can't breach that agreement. She asked us to cancel your reservation and give her the same date and time. I told her that would require your written, notarized consent, which we obviously don't have. She insisted we work something out, but there's nothing to work out. This isn't a restaurant reservation. It's a legal contract. Karen paused. She also asked if we'd call you to convince you to move your date. I told her that's not our role and we wouldn't be doing that. Did you want to cancel? Her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. No, absolutely not. My voice was steady. Karen's voice softened slightly. Good. Because between you and me, Emma, that was one of the strangest calls I've ever received in 11 years of doing this job. Your wedding is happening. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I thanked her, my throat tight, and asked if she could send me a written confirmation of our conversation via email. She agreed immediately. 20 minutes later, the email arrived, formal and clear, a summary of Madison's call, a reiteration of the contract terms, and a confirmation that our event was proceeding as planned. I forwarded it to myself 3 times, saved it in 2 separate cloud folders, and printed a hard copy that I slipped into the wedding binder. That afternoon, I sat in my car during lunch and opened my laptop balanced on the steering wheel. I pulled up the original venue contract, 14 pages, single-spaced, with our signatures on page 12. I highlighted Section 7, subsection C, the breach of contract clause. This agreement is binding and may only be terminated by the clients, herein defined as Emma Harlow and Tyler Brennan, via written notice submitted no less than 90 days prior to the event date. Failure to appear or cancellation within the 90-day window results in forfeiture of all deposits and payments made. I took a screenshot. Then I opened the email from Karen and took another screenshot. I saved both images, then copied the text into a new document. Then I opened the family group chat. My mother, my father, Madison, Tyler, and Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister, who'd always been the calm one at family dinners, the one who asked careful questions and never raised her voice. I typed slowly, reading and rereading every word before I hit send. My wedding is happening as planned on October 14th at the Vineyard. I've attached the signed contract and a written statement from the venue manager confirming that my event cannot be transferred, canceled, or altered without my written consent, which I will not be giving. If you choose to skip my wedding to attend Madison's imaginary event, that's your choice. But I will not be rescheduled, I will not be discussing this further, and I will not be responding to calls or texts on this topic. See you on the 14th or don't. I attached the contract PDF and Karen's email, then pressed send. The message delivered with a small whoosh sound. I closed the laptop, set it on the passenger seat, and ate my sandwich, turkey and Swiss on wheat bread, the same thing I brought most days. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. I felt strangely calm, The way you feel after a fever breaks. The group chat exploded within 11 minutes. My mother called 4 times in a row. I let every call go to voicemail. Madison sent a string of messages, each one longer and angrier than the last. Are you serious right now? You're being so selfish. I'm pregnant, Emma, do you not get that? Mom and Dad are so disappointed in you. You've always been jealous of me. This is so typical. I didn't respond. My father sent a single text an hour later. This isn't how family treats each other. Call your mother. Fix this. I didn't respond to that either. Tyler came home that evening and found me on the couch, staring at a TV I hadn't bothered to turn on. The living room was dim, just the last bit of daylight coming through the front window. He sat beside me without a word, his hand finding mine, his palm warm and rough from work. You okay? He asked quietly. I nodded. I wasn't sure if I was, but I wanted to be. You did the right thing, he said, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I nodded again. I believed him. But part of me, the part that had spent 33 years smoothing over Madison's messes, apologizing for taking up space, making myself smaller so she could feel bigger, felt like I'd just stepped off a cliff and wasn't sure if I'd land or fall. Aunt Linda called 2 days later. It was a Saturday morning, early, the kind of cool, gray morning that smelled like rain even though none had fallen yet. Emma, she said when I answered, her voice calm and measured. I saw the group chat before you muted it. Can we talk? In person? I agreed. She came over an hour later with a thermos of chamomile tea and a small tin of shortbread cookies she'd made the night before. She was 71, a retired paralegal with silver hair she wore in a neat bob and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She'd worked in family law for 30 years before she retired. She didn't miss much. We sat in the living room, her on the armchair, me on the couch. She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs, mine with a chipped handle, hers with a faded floral pattern. The steam rose between us, soft and curling in the cool air. She set the thermos on the coffee table, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me with the same calm, assessing gaze I'd seen her use at 100 family dinners. I want to tell you something I should have said years ago, she began. Your parents enabled Madison because it was easier than holding her accountable. Every time she made a mess, it was simpler to ask you to step aside than to tell her no. You were responsible. You were capable. You didn't make noise. So they leaned on you. She reached for her tea, took a small sip, then continued. But you don't build a life on someone else's back, Emma. And you don't steal someone's wedding because you failed to plan your own. Madison didn't just ask for your date. She tried to erase your contract. She called the venue and tried to manipulate them into canceling you. That's not desperation. That's entitlement. And if you let this go, if you reschedule, if you apologize, if you make yourself smaller again, she'll do it again. And again. Until there's nothing left of you. Her words hung in the air. I felt the weight of them settle into my chest. I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper, what I should do. Aunt Linda set her mug down, her expression unchanged. You already did it. You set a boundary. You put it in writing. You showed them the facts. Now you hold it. No apologies. No explanations. You show up to your wedding, and you let them decide whether they show up to support you or whether they'd rather enable Madison's tantrum. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp and kind at the same time. Paper doesn't lie, Emma. People do. You've got the contract. You've got the venue's written confirmation. She's got excuses and your mother's guilt trips. Stand on what's real. October 14th arrived cool and clear, the kind of autumn day that makes you believe in new beginnings. The vineyard looked exactly as I'd imagined it for 14 months. Long wooden tables draped in white linen, mason jars filled with wildflowers and candles, string lights crisscrossing above the outdoor seating area like a glowing net catching the late afternoon sun. The air smelled like cedar and earth and fermenting grapes, rich and alive. Tyler stood at the altar, a simple wooden arch wrapped in ivy and white roses, wearing a dark gray suit, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his smile soft and sure and just for me. I walked down the aisle in the ivory lace dress I'd chosen myself, paid for myself, altered twice to get the hem exactly right. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings, small and understated. My bouquet was simple: white roses, eucalyptus, a single sprig of lavender. The guests stood as I walked past: friends from work, Tyler's crew from the firehouse, my college roommate who'd flown in from Boston, Aunt Linda in the third row with a tissue already in her hand. My parents sat 2 rows behind her, their faces tight and unreadable. They'd arrived 15 minutes late, slipping into their seats after the processional music had already started. Madison's seat, reserved in the second row, stayed empty. The ceremony was short and honest. The officiant, a retired judge Aunt Linda knew from her legal days, spoke about commitment and choice. When Tyler said his vows, his voice was steady and clear. I promise to choose you every day, not because I have to, but because you're worth choosing. I promise to see you, hear you, and stand with you. I promise to build a life with you that honors who you are, not who anyone else thinks you should be. His eyes stayed on mine the whole time. When it was my turn, I'd written my vows weeks ago, but I added one line, unscripted, that came to me in the moment. I promise to choose people who choose me back. I promise to honor those who honor their commitments. And I promise to protect the life we're building together, because it's ours, and it's worth protecting. I didn't look at my parents when I said it, but I felt the words settle, solid and true, into the space around us. The reception unfolded in soft, joyful chaos. Laughter and clinking glasses and music from a small string quartet Tyler's captain had recommended. Friends danced. Aunt Linda gave a toast that made half the room cry and the other half laugh. My parents stayed through dinner: chicken marsala and roasted vegetables, served on white china, but left before the cake cutting. I watched them from the upstairs balcony, saw them walk to their car without saying goodbye, their headlights cutting through the dusk as they pulled onto the main road. Tyler came up behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. 3 months later, in mid-January, Madison got married at a courthouse downtown. I received a card in the mail with a printed invitation, no RSVP line, no personal note. Just her name and a date. I sent a card back, plain white, a generic congratulations message, signed with just my name. I didn't attend. I didn't call. I didn't apologize for not attending. Aunt Linda called me the week after and told me, in her calm, matter-of-fact way, that Madison had asked our parents for $15,000 to fund a real wedding later that year. They'd said no. For the first time in Madison's 30 years, they'd said no. I think about that October evening often, even now. The way the light filtered gold and amber through the leaves. The way Tyler's hand felt steady and warm in mine when we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. The way Aunt Linda's eyes crinkled when she hugged me and whispered, "You did good, kid." I think about the contract I'd signed 11 months before, the folder I'd kept, the emails I'd saved. I think about how close I came to letting it all go, to rescheduling, to making myself smaller one more time. Some people will test your boundaries until they break. They'll push and push, expecting you to bend, because you always have before. But you get to decide when enough is enough. You get to decide what you're willing to give and what you're allowed to keep. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the people who truly love you is to let others face the consequences of their own choices. Love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice. It's proven by who respects your worth. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I'd love to hear your story. Let me know where you're watching from.